Hey, everybody. Welcome to the Regenerative Cannabis YouTube podcast. Um, I'm stoked here to have Chadwick Rhodes on with us tonight and Bam with Stock and Bean. I actually met Chadwick just under a year ago at the Regenerative Conference in Portland, Maine. Stuttering. I almost said Portland, Oregon. I spent a lot of time living there. But Chadwick hit me up. It was awesome. He was really persistent, and I was kind of slow to get back to him. I remember he had maybe sent me an email and an IG, and you were reaching out to Kevin, and he was trying to get a hold of us to be on the breeders panel. And I'm super glad that you were persistent, because it was awesome to get you on there, and awesome to get to know who you are. And so you're going to be a part of the Regenerative Seed Co-op with us. And dude, thank you so much for coming on the show. And we just want to hear about what you've been up to, man. And thank you for the part you played in preserving the plant. And yeah, we'll kind of get into it, but thank you, man.
Yeah, you're welcome, and thanks back at you, because I was inspired myself and Jodri and the guys on the West Coast have been doing the thing for quite a while and have kind of come out way earlier than some of the OGs over here on the East Coast. Everybody's still a little scared over here, and whenever I saw that you guys were coming to the East Coast with this conference, I really wanted to try to be a part of whatever's pushing that forward. Whether it be get you seed companies or try to encourage some of these folks that are reluctant to come out from under the eyes of persecution. But I enjoyed the conference. It was great to meet you, and I'm even more motivated by the regenerative seed effort that you've taken on recently.
Thanks, man.
That's awesome. Yeah.
Well, why don't you start, kind of briefly, just where did this start for you? Maybe where did cannabis come into your life? And then when did you start growing? And then where did breeding start? And kind of where did you get to where you are in Maine? And,
Yeah, the short version is I was born and raised in Oklahoma. I grew up in a pretty red state, especially whenever it came to cannabis. There was just residue on a pipe until recently. It was a felony. You were going to jail for a long time. So needless to say, I stayed away from it until my early 20s. Whenever I was up in Indiana, I had moved up there in the early 90s, and I used cannabis with a buddy, and it helped me with PTSD early on. I certainly was partying with it as well, but I found that it really helped me calm down and really helped me through a tough time in my life there for a couple of years. And about 94 or 95, I had a friend in Indiana that was a real cannabis head den. I mean, I went up in his attic, I'll never forget, in 94, and this guy had a kiddie pool with blue water in it and a 5-gallon bucket sitting in it on a couple of bricks with soil in that, and then holes drilled and these nylon ropes coming down into his kiddie pool so that it would water his plant for like weeks at a time. He could only go up in his attic when his wife wasn't home, and that was like on a weekend or something. So I was like, wow, what is this you're doing? And this is how this plant's grown. And so I really got interested in it. Just I caught the bug, and so I started helping him breed early on. His bubble gum was what he had, and what he what are some other stuff that through. Guys were always buying seeds from Amsterdam, and it seemed like that it was really crappy stuff. The only thing I was ever really impressed with in Indiana back in the 90s was the bubble gum, just because it tasted remarkably like bazooka bubble gum. Switched from there, I moved down to Florida by way of a couple of other states, and while I was down in Florida, I didn't do any breeding. I kind of got away from that, but I didn't quit smoking at all. And I started gathering some seeds from down there that were mostly chem dog hybrids. early stuff, and I decided to move to Maine. Like I said, around 2002 or so. And whenever I came up, I just had some seeds in my pocket, and I decided, well, I ran into a lot of people growing up here, way more than I anticipated. This is, these people are, they're into it. And I had some skill. And a lot of the folks that were up here were trying to grow it, but they were struggling because they couldn't finish their plants, being as far north as we are. And I'm sure you're, familiar with the early finish. And so I started, breeding and getting a hold of some early varieties for these guys and cloning. Not most of these guys were growing with seed up here, and they were trusting their buddies. A lot of guys didn't know how to pull males very well, and so there were some failures around, and I kind of became the clone guy, if you will. So people would come to me in the spring, and the next thing you know, I was collecting plants. Like when I first arrived in Maine, the early 2000s, Durbin poison was probably about that I'd ran into that was here, and it was a seed form. So I don't know what generation I was at, but it was remarkable. It was good stuff, and it would finish here. So I cloned and bred with that for a little while. Got a hold of Chem Dog 4 early on, about 2004 or 5. Started doing some breeding with that, and then I got into landraces. And for me, I anticipated that legalization was coming. It was kind of like watching dominoes, fall these states. It was like, wow, we're up to 6. Holy shit, now it's 8 states. And where we're at today is, I'm real glad that back then I anticipated that it was going to go like this, because I started collecting. I have a partner that we just, chased down everything we could from a different continent. Folks that were, that could really tell us about the plants. My partner and I both have, degrees in horticulture, from the University of Maine. So, we knew what to ask for and what not to ask for with a lot of these folks. And so right now, I think I've got 4 or 5 continents. I think I have 5 continents in seed form and 4 in the plant form. And so where I've kind of focused my breeding to kind of bring it all together is I've been trying to take the best of the old school hybrids that are out there, the guys like Mandelbrot and whoever that really put in the time breeding. And I try to cross their stuff up with males that I've selected from these land races. And, to touch ups. And that's been doing me real well for well over a decade. I've never sold seed though. So, I've never, I should say I've never sold seed, in the white market, if you will. And so it's kind of cool to be doing this, to have done this Beldia project that we talked about, and maybe we can move it along.
I'm going to cut you short. You said that when you were out there hunting those landrace varietals, that based on your background, you knew what to ask for and not what to ask for. Can you break that down for us? Like, I want to know that thought process.
Yeah, that's great. So, we would research an area where we would, first off, we went back into the history, as spoken by most, that ideas that maybe it came from or spawned from Central Asia. My partner seems to think that way. I lean a little bit more towards that it came from perhaps the Congo or in South Africa, but we don't know, right? More of the evidence points towards Central Asia and that it's migrated its way across. So we took specific spots, and then we researched people who were breeding, or trying to breed, or said that they had stuff from these areas, and then we knew we would do our homework. We'd go, okay, let's research the weather there, and when can cannabis finish and not finish, and we know these things, right? We know a plant can't grow if it's minus 12 degrees on average at a certain time in the Himalayas, and so that's the kind of question. So what's the finish time on this land race? And of course land race is used loosely by a lot of people. I like to say land race is truly land race. It's wild and it's growing out in the wild and been collected in that form. Most of stuff that the guys that we've run into are calling it land race, but it's actually farm. They're selecting in some fashion and cultivating in some manner. So we'd ask a lot of these questions, then we'd grow it out and see what we got. Now, without genetic testing, you can't know, but when you grow a Lebanese plant out, and it's throwing 13 leaflets and looking like something like you've never grown, it's you just notice those things in the flower form. I can remember getting White Widow back in the day, and I really thought it was something special. I grew in Maine, and it was nothing. Yeah.
Nice. Was there a certain geographic region that fascinated you most, or were there certain traits that you were like, yes, I want those, and then others that you weren't? You're like, nah, I don't even want to mess with that.
And I was going to say, what parallel are you on? I think we talked about this on the phone the other day, but what parallel are you on? Are you on 45?
45th.
45th.
I'm right on 45. Yeah, so early finish was it for me early on. That was the trait that I really looked for. Of course, and we had no testing in the day, so on the males it's stem rubs, finishing it out, looking at structure, all of the knockdown stuff there, and then for the females that we got, it was for early finish. Disease resistance, no hermaphrodism. Would stress test stuff, or I would. Those were the early traits that I would look for. Dense, unfortunately, higher THC, just because we were looking for stuff to knock your socks off. And dense bud, bag appeal. Most of the stuff that the guys were growing here was going right where you were talking about down in Boston. And in 2004, they were getting $45 a pound, all day long to send it, down that way. So
some of the stuff coming out of Maine back in the day would be good enough to make me come up.
Yeah, there's definitely. I've always said that Maine is like the Emerald Triangle of the East Coast. Smaller versions certainly.
Montreal, Vermont, and Maine. New Hampshire gets some props, but they're kind of an oddball in the Eastern Emerald Triangle, right?
Yeah, they are. But what's funny though, you go up right into New Hampshire from Boston, and there's a CBD sign every quarter of a mile in any like Manchester or something like that. It's just so they'll be on board soon.
Yeah. So before we started the interview, I was asking you, like, when you first so being from the East Coast, and we were discussing how Maine was kind of like the silent hero in a lot of like heady bud. And I remember a lot of different cuts that came out around Western Mass and other cuts that came out of like Vermont. We were getting like killer big bud, silver pearl, bubble gum, and AK-47. A lot of, and I'm sure that a lot of those were like Dutch, but the growers behind them
They're still around.
Yeah, those cuts are still around. Yeah, that Durbin.
Affirmative.
I'm pretty sure that the Durbin that you were talking about earlier is the one that I remember. You could cure it in a ball mason jar, and when you'd open the lid, there'd be like honey around
Yep.
around the inside of the lid, done in like 56 days. Little spear, nice lemon lime colors with that like beautiful anise nose, and yeah, just
Oh,
bulletproof. I miss her.
sounds, yeah, super sweet on the draw.
Yeah,
Orange, real hairs,
yep.
dense bud. We were always, most of the time, we were in seedling form, but yeah. Now, yeah, those pets are still around. There are
Did you make
still some
seeds
old
back
school
then
guys.
with those? Did you like make pure
What's
seeds
that?
like Durbin IBLs?
No, the guys that were messing with the Durbin, they didn't know what they were doing. So yeah, they got it all hermaphrodited up by the time I got to it to try to preserve it. I didn't realize. Yeah. So, but I know the last that I was on at the Regenerative Conference, the breeder on both sides of me claimed to have Durbin poison. So, and both started with it as well. So
Okay.
it's around, I'm sure. Now, I don't think I don't have any confidence that it's in the early form. You know, maybe it's several generations out.
Let me ask you guys about this. The cherry pie is said to be made from a Durbin and Granddaddy Perp cross. I don't see that flavor in the Granddaddy Perp, and so
Okay, but I believe it 100% because back in the day, I think this was like circa 2007.
You're saying you don't believe it, or you do believe it?
No, 100% believe it. Here's why. So this is like so back then, in like cherry pie was like first coming out, like it would always have seed in it, always. You couldn't get a pound without some seed in it. And I think I had amassed something like 300 of those seeds, and I popped them, and one of them came out male. And whether that was from drift or it was a self, there's no way that I could know. It's bag seed, right? But it's bag seed from consistent lot of product that always hermied. And the growers would say that back then. But long story short, I used that male onto a couple other strains, and the dominant terpene in all those crosses was that same. I don't know if it's terpenoline, but it's like the anise smell of Durbin, and that just made it else. So I mean, by the least amount of logic, they had the Durbin in their garden, right? But then again, you know, it's hard to say because now I feel like
anise to me, anise to me is very far from the cherry pie flavor, and right. I don't catch that in the yeah, I know what the anise is, but I don't catch that in the Granddaddy Perp either. So that's what I'm asking about from guys who have gone through more of the Durbin seeds. Like, are you seeing that in there, or is it just one of the rare combinations of the two that came out?
Which cherry pie cut, right? Like circa 2007, sure. Cherry pie was always white. It was white, and it had a couple seeds, but it was like white covered in frost, beautiful. And then over time, I started seeing more like purple varieties, and like the leaf frost, and then seeds were popped. And so you have this spectrum of plants that are on the market with that name that have a little bit of the mom and a little bit of the dad. But the original cherry pie that I remember, it wasn't the Durbin anise, but it had that like sharp frontal nasal like opening, kind of like a Vicks Vapor Rub, but like not menthol. but it also had a lot of gas. You know, it also had a lot of gas. So, and I've seen like the Granddaddy dominant cherry pies out there. So
You're on mute, Chadwick. We can't hear you.
Sorry about that. I just grew foul mouth, which is herbs. I didn't have much luck with. I had 10 plants, and I didn't find anything I really wanted to keep out of it. I mean, the structure was beautiful on these plants. The flower formation was great. They were dense bud, but they didn't. The flavor wasn't there, and and smokability wasn't there. That's something I'm finding a lot out of some of these varieties. For instance, the cherry. I don't have any experience with the cherry that you guys are talking about. The Durbin, yeah, but not the cherry pie itself. I've heard of it.
mm-hmm.
Well, and so I
if you have the cherry pie, you're not missing anything, brother. I mean, if you have the Durbin poison.
I don't know about the earlier one that you're talking about. So I was just like everybody else, got a bag seed of the cherry pie, popped it, and was like, oh, this is just whatever it said in the corner, and then it was amazing. And so I kept running it, and I actually won. I met Kevin Jodry at the first Turf Festival that I won with the cherry pie rosin I made from that bag seed, and it was a purple version, like you say. And what stood out to me, and the flavor profile, was this crust. It was the buttery crust, of a pie, right? When you just taste that buttery crust on a pie. And that's what stood out. And it had a little bit of cherry, but it wasn't forward with the cherry. And so then going forward in growing, I got into the Pie-Ho. Canorado did a cross with the cherry pie on the Grape Ape. And I got back onto the Tahoe OG. And so I could taste that same buttery crust from the cherry pie in this Pie-Ho that I've been working with. And I've done some crosses with that. But I haven't ever gotten that buttery flavor back. And so my question is, do you guys think that butter is coming from the Durbin?
Yeah, I believe so. The Durbin was just like Yao, he was explaining, it was even gassy, what we messed with. And I can remember, curing in a jar with it. You had to pop the jar like daily for the first week almost, or every other day, and it would just coat the sides of the jar. But the flavor for me was rosin. A little bit. Yeah, it was. I wish I would have had 20 power or a 60 power scope back then and been looking at trichomes, but I wasn't. We were just into that. The Durbin was super dense. Ours had a little more of an orange flavor, it seemed to me. But these were seed batches, so there was a little variety around. But you knew that you were walking up to Durbin plants when you walked up to those seedlings. This was a pretty homozygous group of seeds that these guys were messing with. The problem was that they bred hermaphroditism right into their stock. And, unfortunately, ouch. It's just like losing great pets along the way.
Let me ask.
You can fix that, though. You can fix that. You want to put in the work.
Yeah, I agree. I agree. Knowledge and time. Potato farmer only gets 30 tries, right? In his life.
Yeah, exactly. Totally. Give thanks for the next round.
Yeah.
Let me ask you guys both this question. It's kind of a left field question. But you guys both took time to get educated formally on horticulture. And not too many people in the cannabis sector that we talk to do that. And, you know, obviously I put on the conference and I'm into education. I'm not formally educated in horticulture. And I just wondered if you guys could individually speak to like what was the power of that, you know, and what do you see the differences in like some of the top knowledgeable heads in cannabis and some of the things you learned in school, and like kind of what, you know, with discrepancies, or I don't know, just wherever that takes you.
Yeah, go ahead. I'll let you go first.
Man, what? I'm a dreamer, right? And I like to like dream big, and I'm always like, as my wife calls me, there's a Spanish story called El Lechero, and that can be my nickname because I like to dream big, and I also like hands-on experience, and so it's like going to these places. It really opens up my mind and like allows me to connect with other people that have different types of experiences. And there's a lot to be said about the scientific approach and that methodology. But there's also a lot to be said about like wisdom and experience. And so it's like sometimes when I'm sitting in class and they're dropping, hold up. I know that to be different working with this plant. And I think like that's probably like one of the coolest parts about like going into like academia, because it's like they're revolved around industrial. Academia revolves around like industry, especially the ag world in schools. And so there's that heavy influence, and like what they're studying is like a lot of times based on like commercial needs and purposes. And so like it's fewer cultivars that have been domesticated on industrial level for a long time. So a lot of like weird, rare, like recessive traits that cannabis does, and cannabis being a very different plant in terms of how it operates genetically, then a lot complicates that. And it's nice to sometimes like run across those things that they take for dogma and like just like as law, and being like, I saw something different. And then you go back and you look at older textbooks before like the Industrial Revolution and stuff like that, and they describe these kind of things. But some of these traits that are undesirable on a commercial level are kind of what I'm referring to. And so school is a great tool to like open your mind. Like, am I the straight A student? No. I don't try to be. That's not why I go there. I go there to expand my own thought and horizons, and like bump heads and learn some skills and techniques, because like they do some things really, really well. Like incorporate statistics into your breeding. You can achieve what would normally take somebody a lifetime in 5 years. And as you were saying, how many runs do we have at it? I'm 41. If I can pull off 2 to 3 in a year and leave myself some downtime, and then think about like my retirement, like, yeah, maybe I have another 50 runs if I'm lucky. So like by being able to incorporate statistics into your program and speeding up what might be like 20 years worth of work into like 5 years worth of work, that was my inspiration, because what little I had read on my own made me realize how daunting of a task the breeder that I want to be, not the breeder that I claim to be, or sometimes I hate even calling myself a breeder. I'm just a chucker, you know? Because if you look like to like take it to that level, it's a lot of work. So long story short, it's just a way of self-improvement.
Yeah. Well, I believe that you're a breeder in your heart, you know, and it doesn't matter whether you're chucking pollen or not. I think everybody starts out chucking pollen. Um, for myself at 40, I'm 50 now. At 40, I started a bucket list, a serious bucket list, and getting a bachelor's degree by the time I was 50 was one of those bucket list items.
Big up and congratulations.
And in 2008, yeah, thank you very much. It was quite a journey. So in 2008, when the tanked and the Great Recession began, I got double whammy there because I was in construction. I've been a builder I was a builder for about 30 years, third generation. And I had to make a decision at that point, to either stay in the business or not. And I tried to stay in. I limped for probably about 4 or 5 years. And then finally, I'm going to go get my degree. I'm going to get an engineering degree. So I went to the University of Maine, who has a great engineering program, and I started out my first semester in physics and calc was just unbelievably tough. Going back to school so many years later, luckily enough, I was pretty good at that stuff anyway. And I had a friend come up to me and he goes, "What are you doing?" He goes, "You're going to school to be an engineer, construction still? You're not." He goes, "Cannabis is it's coming, dude, and you're the man." And I was just like, "What do you mean?" He goes, they have the oldest sustainable ag department in the United States, the oldest sustainable ag department collegiately. And I was like, "Really?" So I went over and talked to him. And after my first semester, I switched from agriculture and I switched my life's focus from construction and building to cannabis. And my idea was that I'm going to get this degree and knock this bucket list item down. While I'm at UMaine, I'm going to focus on cannabis as I can, which was really hard to do because, they're federally funded. And, many of the classes I wasn't even allowed to talk about cannabis. But I was able to talk about plants hypothetically in all kinds of forms. I got a great education. I got really lucky. The professors in the program that I went through there are at a pretty high level. There's not a lot of people, so a lot of the classes that I sat through whenever I got into the 300 and 400 level were 7 to 10 people, which gave us tremendous access to PhDs and master students and experiment. I still keep my contacts with UMaine and hope that whenever things flip that I could be a part of them switching. I believe that they will teach cannabis there because half the students that were in my program, we were talking about it, behind, outside of class. And education's always been key to me. If I'm not learning or growing in some form, I'm not living. That's kind of been my motivation for why I went back to get the education.